Welcome to Your Anxious Child, 5-Minute Solutions, a podcast dedicated to providing practical advice and support for parents of anxious children. This advice is informational in nature and not a substitute for a consultation with a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Dr. Edward Plimpton.
Welcome back to Your Anxious Child, 5-Minute Solutions and Interviews with Experts. Today, we're talking with Stephanie Malia Krauss, who's just written her third book, How Do We Thrive? Caring for Kids and Ourselves in a Changing World. She is an educator, social worker, and author of 2 other books, and she's compiled or written a book in which she's interviewed hundreds of experts, chasing down the issue of how we can help thrive in this kind of current climate. And Stephanie, thank you so much for talking to us. And what else should we know about you?
Oh, I'm really glad to be here, Ted, and to be able to just share with parents who are in such similar situations to me, what I've learned in my work and writing and the research and the interviews that I've had. As you mentioned, I have the great gift in my job of being able to talk to people who are so much smarter on particular topics than I could ever be, and to really learn from them focused on what is good for kids and what is good for the adults caring for kids. And so I think besides knowing my background in education and social work, it's important to know that the heart of this work for me is as a mom, that I've got a middle schooler and a high schooler. And in terms of your show and the wisdom that you bring into the world, they run anxious. And so, there is, I think, a level of integrity and curiosity in really wanting to make sure I deeply understand what I'm talking about before I ever present it to caregivers as advice, whether that's on something specific like sleep or something a little bit more esoteric like spirituality.
I was kind of struck that you had your son Harrison, age 12, write the foreword, and he, wrote very eloquently, about your book. Is he one of your anxious offspring?
He is. He talks about it a little bit in the foreword. So he would like to tell you he's now 13, but they have to, say the age that you are when you actually write it. Thank God they don't ask me to put my age when I write each of my books. But my last book, Whole Child, Whole Life, my son Justice wrote about his experiences, and Whole Child, Whole Life was really about, it was a response to the youth mental health crisis and providing us with the cross training that we need to take good care of our kids and to prepare them not only for the challenges they face now, but in the future. And I thought that really had to start with the voice of a kid. And who better to keep me honest than my oldest child? And actually, in that forward, he talks about his experiences with OCD and with anxiety, and how important various adults were in his own journey. That included that diagnosis and real challenges with that happened at the height of the pandemic. And then when it came to writing How We Thrive, I thought, well, I should just continue this trend. While How We Thrive is actually as much about us, the adults, as it is kids, it's really a book about collective care. I still want it to primarily focus on how do we create conditions that are healthy for our young people, healthy for our kids, so that they can thrive. And those same conditions are often what we need. And so in that forward, Harrison also talks about how imperfect his mother is, but how I do go after whatever I don't know the answer to, because I really believe that the opportunity I have in writing books about the science of human thriving and the science of well-being is at its best really life-giving, and in the most challenging moments, potentially also life-saving.
One of the things that kind of struck me is when you began speaking and you were asking the audience how they were doing. Um, you've been asking that question for a while. Um, and I was kind of thinking, gee, I'm kind of hoping that you're getting some different responses now. Perhaps you could tell our audience what you found in asking that question and whether there have been any changes over time.
So I'm gonna take you back 6
Yeah.
years. My first book is coming out. It's called Making It: What Today's Kids Need for Tomorrow's World. So it's all about what we really need to do to prepare kids for the future. The problem is the book comes out at the height of the pandemic, when our households are homeschools and we are all locked at home. I mean, this was still the time of the pandemic where I was wearing a mask and sanitizing my groceries with no people around me, right? We had no idea what was getting us sick and how to keep ourselves safe. And so nobody wanted to talk about the future. They were so eclipsed by everything that was happening right now. And so I go on this book tour that's a basement book tour, only by screen. And I'm connecting with people in the little Brady Bunch squares of a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting or a WebEx. And I couldn't see them. I couldn't feel them. I couldn't see where we were sitting and the context. And so I began to live poll every group that I connected with. And when I speak to anyone who's caring for kids, personally or professionally. So parents, teachers, coaches, youth workers, counselors, you name it. So I would ask 3 questions. How are your kids? How are your families? And how are you? And as you mentioned, I talk about it in How We Thrive. In the beginning, the most common answers were, we're all overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, and tired. Kids, families, and the people I was talking to. And I thought, well, I am too. It's the middle of a pandemic, but it must please, like it has to get better. And at that time, people were also asking me, it's interesting. I'm interested in what you have to say about what young people need to be ready for the future. But I want to know what they need to be well right now. How can I care for kids? And so my work at that time transitioned from how do we prepare kids for the future to how do we care for them now in a way that's going to support them today and also tomorrow. And I kept asking the questions. How are your kids? How are your families? How are you? And unfortunately, the further out I got from the pandemic, the more often folks were saying we're overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, and tired. And so are our kids. And increasingly, they were saying we're burned out, we're anxious, we're distracted. And so instead of getting better, things were actually getting worse. Across all 6 years, there's only been one instance where the responses have been different, and it just happened last week. 6 years of asking the questions, no matter what community, no matter what their context, no matter what their demographics, everyone overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, and tired. So last week, Ted, was the first time I ever got to poll a group of hundreds of preschool teachers. And I said, how are the kids? Joyful, curious, engaged, happy, playful, adorable, present. And it made me think about the research that I've read about centenarians. I don't know if you've ever read, like, when studies come out. Harvard did a study. There have been New York Times articles of people who live to 100 or older. And what are the things that they value the most in life? And what do people say about who they are as people? And it's a very similar picture. Sense of humor is important. Sense of connection is important. Having, being playful, being curious, being full of wonder. And so it just struck me that at the bookends of our life, the things that we're really wired for, the ways that we're meant to live, is this natural tendency toward curiosity and play and wonder and joy and connection. And then the question is, what happens in our environment and when that changes over and we feel so overwhelmed and anxious and stressed and tired. Um, so I'm still sitting with that. I have some thoughts on when that transition happens and why, based on what I wrote about and how we thrive. But it was so shocking because I still asked the next two questions last week. How are your families and how are you? And then saw overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, tired.
I was kind of hoping that, as I, read that in your book that, things, have changed or are on an upward slope. But, even just a kind of a casual reading of the newspapers would suggest that, I mean, recent article in a medical journal indicating that the rates of children coming into kind of pediatric practices because of anxiety have increased substantially. Um, Another article documenting how women get lots of care during their pregnancy, but after in the postpartum period, there's no support whatsoever. And then we have the kind of issue of measles breaking out because people are not engaging in the kind of collective good of developing herd immunity. And of course, there was a Surgeon General's kind of, report a couple of years ago, raising kind of alarm as well. So, so what, what are the things that, have contributed to kind of stress and overwhelm in our kind of current era?
Mhm. So I want to go back to the polling. So here I am, and I'm going from one community to the next. And one day it's a group of teachers. And then the next day it's parents and grandparents. And then it's youth workers who run after school programs and summer camps. And I realize that I don't know anybody else in my field, in youth development, child development, education, who has the responsibility of that data. Who else is asking that many people
Yeah.
across so many diverse communities that question? And then also realizing that I am overwhelmed and overloaded. My husband is overwhelmed and overloaded. Our children are overwhelmed and overloaded. And so, How We Thrive was a book that was written in response to that. And, in the same way that I told you the first book, Making It, was about how do we prepare kids for a changing future. And then Whole Child was a book about how do we care for kids right now. How We Thrive is really a book about how do we repair our lives collectively, because this normal is not natural. It's restricting the best parts of what it means to be human and some of the most protective, natural superpowers that we have to not just endure life in that age of anxiety that you're describing, but also to enjoy it. And so when I think about thriving, Thriving for me has three components. One is I have what I need to evolve to keep growing and going. I have what I need to endure because there will be challenges and obstacles. And I have what I need to enjoy because what is life if you can't enjoy it? So, what I needed to know out of my own curiosity and also insistence as a mom, like, I have to figure this out for my own kids because I want them to have good lives, is what is at play in this age of anxiety, in these really turbulent times that makes hard lives harder and good lives still stressful and overwhelming. Said a little bit differently in the context of your listeners, if our kids had a clinical predisposition to anxiety or OCD or tics or Tourette's or any of those, ADHD, any of that kind of cluster of conditions, it seems that there are outside forces, big external forces that are inflaming those predispositions, turning them on earlier, making them more intense. And then if you're a kid who maybe wouldn't have developed clinical anxiety or OCD or anything similar, you may still run pretty anxious because of the environment that you're in. So, briefly, I'll just say in my research and writing in How We Thrive, I talk about four dangerous weather conditions of modern life. These are the things that some of them have been around for a while, but we're kind of sitting in the epicenter of all four operating at once. And you and I talked about this before the show. It's distinct, these four forces coming together. It's the storms that we're in modern life. The first is the sense of being overtapped, that there's never enough time or resource to meet our demands. The task list and to-do list is so long. Life is so expensive, demanding so many resources. Our calendars are so crowded. And so, from a psychology perspective, we call this tunneling. It's that phenomenon of scarcity. We hyperfixate on not having enough time, never being able to get everything we need done, and it just runs in the background all of the time. And the education systems our kids go to school in, the workforces that we have our jobs in often exacerbate that because there's a sense of we constantly need to do more, that success is about how much you get done, how crowded your calendar is. The second force is being
Oh,
overworked.
oh, so
Yeah.
hold on.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. um, so there's really this, what you're identifying is an overemphasis on productivity. Um,
Absolutely. And the
yeah.
response to that productivity, both productivity and scarcity,
Mhm.
because it's time and resource scarcity, that we never have enough time because there's always too much that has to get done, too many tasks. Again, that like really crowded calendar, and that being a marker that you're doing well, or that's what you are supposed to do or have to do to get by. And then on the financial side, the rising cost of everything and the idea of never having enough. And so that does create the sense of, so for folks listening, this idea of tunneling is it gets really hard to not see everything through the lens of, oh my God, this is just another thing to do. I just have another. When I interview students, most schools, have laws that a school year is like 180 days or 190 days. But if you ask high school students, they're like, we're in school for 200, 300 days, and these days are 10 hours long. It's a sense that they're already feeling like they're burning out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and And certainly, in books like Jennifer Wallace's on kind of the kind of toxic culture that you can have, these very high achieving kind of kids who ultimately don't feel that there's much meaning in what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. They feel like they're just going through the motions and that they're never gonna be able to catch up, or get enough done, and, of course, Jennifer Wallace, her work has now extended to thinking about mattering and this idea of, like, I'm just kind of a cog in the machine. It's hard to feel like you matter when you just have to keep going. So that connects to the second force, which is feeling overworked. So in the United States right now, we work 1.5 to 2 times more than most other places, and that is paid work and unpaid work. And for our kids, often that is this push of just you wait till you get to middle school. You're going to have to do so much more work. Just you wait till you get to high school. We're preparing you for high school by giving you more work and more assignments and very related to being overtapped. It is a focus on productivity and performance over pleasure and personhood. We have to keep doing, and doing is more important than being, in this sense of chronic, constant busyness. And for some of us, the idea that if I were to slow down, that would be so risky because would I be able to provide? And would I be able to keep going or would I lose my job? So we feel like we're prisoners toward that need for performance and overproducing, that chronic busyness. So that's the second force. So those two you can imagine really go hand in hand. They're also really characteristic of a lot of American culture. These are the forces that aren't really new, but again, when they kind of blend with the next two, they, create some pretty significant weather conditions. So you can think about this like the rain and the wind of we can handle bad rain. Like, where's our protective umbrella or symbolic umbrella? But when the rain and the wind combine with high heat and hail, now it's a really dangerous situation. So the third dangerous weather condition is being overstimulated. It is the real harm that we face from addictive, manipulative tech. What actually happens from a neurobiological perspective, especially to our young people, big tech companies really do prey on the developmental vulnerabilities of our kids, and we get hooked and harmed by addictive tech. No one more so than our children. So that third force, that one's new. We haven't seen it like this and in this way at any other time in history. And then the fourth is being overwrought. It's that existential dread, the real fear for our lives. So, that I always think of as like the background noise. In my mind, this is compressed catastrophic living. We have a background buzz all the time that something terrible could happen. And so, you think about anxiety or worry. For example, my two anxious kids, their god brother, who they were raised with, is a survivor of a school shooting, and he was shot. I mean, it was a real horrible trauma for our community, but for Brian, we all survived that shooting. Brian actually had multiple injuries. And my boys have to go back to school every day, see, an armed police officer when they get to the building, and then they're walking in double locked doors with, um, like foggy glass to keep intruders out. And all of the signals in their body are blaring, alert, alert. And, they don't even recognize it, but their body does. And so those four weather conditions, being overtapped, being overworked, being overstimulated, and overwrought, we have to be very clear-sighted that those are present in our lives at any time and in different combinations. And again, if you consider it like weather, the rain, the wind, extreme heat or hail, sometimes they can be managed when they're light. They're just a part of life. We have to navigate them. But when they're really intense and when they're intense in combination, there is a weathering effect. There is a real wear and tear on our kids and on ourselves.
Yeah, the last part of what you're saying, there's weathering, just as the kind of weather will shape new canyons, will wear down rocks and stuff like that. That kind of chronic stress really does have an effect on our bodies and physiology.
Yeah. And so, I'll just say this before we sort of pivot the conversation. If we only focus on preparing our kids to be in the weather, you got to do more. You got to get these assignments in. It's on the calendar. We're going to be late. We're running out of time. No, this is too expensive. We paid for that. Um, get off the tech, or you're on tech too much, or here's the device or the news. Of course they're going to be anxious, and so are we. Those you don't need any kind of genetic makeup to feel really worried and really anxious about life and school and work and the future in that context. And so the question then is how what are the protective factors? How do you really, if that is the weather, learn to navigate in that, but also wayfind in that kind of world in a way that still allows you to endure and enjoy the journey? And because it's not all bad all the time.
Well, yeah, your use of the weathering kind of metaphor is so evocative. Um, and, what you were just sort of saying about how if we're going to kind of thrive, we need to not just be adjusting to the weather. We need to do something else. And what is that something else?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So, it's so interesting. I would have said I'm a futurist more than I'm a historian. I look out to, how are we going to prepare kids for this uncertain, changing world? What do we see could happen in the future? But when I was researching how we thrive, um, it was I call it like a look back to the future. I wanted to go back in human history and really understand across time. Like humans in our current form, we've been walking around the world for about 300,000 years, which means, for our American listeners, we're about to celebrate 250 years of our democracy. That's less than 1% of human history. And the last few years of our post pandemic life, that's 1% of the 1% of human history. So there have been challenging times before. There have been really hard, new, changing experiences. And I wanted to understand who was able to thrive and why. What were they tapping into? And what I found from the research, including history and evolutionary biology and sociology, so looking at, you know, human history and human beings, what we need from a biological and psychological perspective, is that we have a set of natural capacities, what I call in How We Thrive human essentials, that have a profoundly outsized impact on our ability to be healthy and happy and hearty and to feel whole. They help us experience the resiliency that we need. They help us tap into joy and times of enjoyment. They improve and our health and protect us from different health conditions. And they allow us to be a more integrated whole human. The problem is that the dangerous weather of modern life often restricts or even rejects those essentials. So when a school, for example, is so focused on overworking kids, you got to produce more, you got to perform more. We don't have time for these evolutionary essentials. What we find is that our kids, and this often happens to us in our work, they can't tap into the natural storehouses they have, these internal protective factors that are going to keep them physically and psychologically healthy and physically and psychologically hardy, like resilient and strong. So we have 14 of these essentials, and they range. They're everything from our capacity to get sleep and the importance of sleep to things like movement and play, creativity, contribution. And the incredible thing is that they're free. We're born with them. We're born knowing how to do them. Play is another example. But increasingly, in the spaces where we're spending time, they are restricted. So when I look back in history at groups of people who've endured incredible hardship and come through it, often they had the conditions that still protected play, celebration, movement, sleep. And so when I think about our kids being overwhelmed and overloaded and stressed and tired at 8 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, 17 years old, and I think about how they started, like what we talked about, the preschoolers.
Mhm.
The only thing that happens is a change in the environment and that deep restricting of the very things they need to face the weather and be free to learn how to be incredible navigators too, and to enjoy that journey along the way. So for us, the way forward is what I talk about in the book as rehumaning as a practice. How can we be aware of what these human essentials are? There are 14 of them, so we can learn them. They get organized across body, mind, heart, and spirit. We deserve to know the science of how the human, especially how the human in hard times. Sometimes I feel like I know more about computers or cars than I do about humaning. So, the first part of rehumaning is being aware of what these essentials are that really protect our health and happiness and wholeness, but also optimize, ironically, learning and work and productivity and performance. The second level is what are the actions we can take in the environments we're in? So, what do we have the power to change and to do? So, for example, I need to sleep as a human essential. We sleep for more than a third of our life. We don't learn a lot about the science of sleep. We deserve to know about the sleep we need and our kids need at any age or stage in any situation. So that's the awareness. Then, once I'm aware, what are the actions I can take? Oh, well, now I know my kids may need a different pillow than the ones that I provided for them. Or we need to cool down our house, 68 degrees or cooler. There are things I can do. But then there might be things that we have to ask for or advocate for. The school start times in my kids' school way too early. My children should not be waking up so early and going to school. And in fact, I now know the relationship between sleep and anxiety. If they're getting less sleep, they're going to be more anxious. So I can learn the science of sleep. I can tell them the sleep they need. I can make sure they have the pillow and the temperature and the quiet they need at home. But then there is a level of rehumaning, which is now I also know that I need to be active in my school in advocating for a later school start time.
You just backtracking a little bit, I found one of your explanations of why we're in this kind of situation very compelling, which was that the pace of change has changed kind of dramatically. And, whether it's the kind of the way in which technology has kind of hit us like a bullet train,
Mhm.
um, or changes in food, with the kind of predominance of kind of processed food, all of that stuff has hit us, and we really haven't had time to catch up to those changes. I thought it was, that we're still dealing with this kind of machinery that was developed over, hundreds of thousands of years, and our biology hasn't caught up.
Yeah, that's right. So any biologist that I talked about, so you've said a couple of things right there that are important to flag for your listeners. One is we can't metabolize the amount of change and how fast it's happening. The most concrete example that I have found in my research and writing is the idea of patents. So you remember if somebody came up with an invention, they would apply for a patent. Well, they're phasing patents out now because by the time the process is completed, somebody has already innovated another disruptive way of doing that particular thing. And so we don't even, the pace of change is so accelerated, so rapid that there's not even a purpose behind a patent for an invention because that's how quickly everything is changing. So you're absolutely right. But we have ancient bodies. And what, biologists say is it takes sometimes thousands of years for our body to adapt and adjust to different changes. And that's where I go back to this real modern mismatch that our normal isn't natural. And our bodies they are a marvel. They are also not able to adjust biologically and psychologically to all of the stimulation and all of the additions and adjustments to our environment that we're facing every day. Um, and that contributes to that weathering that we're feeling. So if we're able to adjust our lives and moments and spaces where we spend time back into more natural contexts, it gives our body both relief and a release of like, oh, I know how to do this. Oh, this is restorative. This is reclaiming how I'm meant to learn and how I'm meant to work. Um, if we spend all of our time on the tech that our body hasn't adapted to, on the sitting, and being more sedentary and moving less, on other changes that have occurred in the last 5 years, 50 years, 100 years. It it we pay a price for it.
Are there some simple kind of ways in which we can kind of incorporate some of this?
Yeah.
Um, I'm getting a little overwhelmed and kind of concerned about, how I can kind of get back there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I came out of this book incredibly hopeful and also clear-sighted. Um, so here's where I find my hope. I don't know if you remember this, but back in the pandemic days when we all were at home, back when my first book was coming out about the future and we're all hunkered down, there were environmental scientists around the world. And I don't know if you remember this, but they came out and they said, oh my God, we were wrong. The earth actually heals itself far faster than we thought it would. When the conditions are right, the earth repairs itself and cares for itself in an incredible way, right? Fish started returning to different oceans. The coral reef started to whatever. repair itself. I mean, it was remarkable. Our bodies and our minds and our hearts and spirits are very, very similar. When we give them the conditions that we crave, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of movement or sleep or celebration, it has a profoundly outsized impact on how we're feeling and how we're doing. And so for me, the way forward, rehumaning really is a regular daily practice. It's what are the very small adjustments up to the countercultural moves I can make that protect these human essentials, which across time have always served us well. And so, one of the very basic things that I do is actually running the list every day. So, I do a daily download of, the essentials of the body, and folks can read about these and how we thrive and our how we eat, sleep, move, and regulate. Of the mind, it's play, wonder, flow, and create. The heart, it's connect, love, and belong. And spirit is celebrate, contribute, and believe. And so I can go through and say, how's my body? How's my mind? How's my heart? How's my spirit? And figure out, are there small tweaks I can make? Oh, I didn't go to bed early enough. I want to try to go to bed 10 minutes earlier. Or, you know what? Let's go play pickleball. It's 2 minutes down the road. Let's do it. Um, or celebration, sharing good news with someone. There's a researcher, a belonging researcher, Jeffrey Cohen. He calls this situation crafting. It's making these really minor adjustments to our situation that just adjust the environment enough to make it conducive to what we naturally need. So this little mini shift kind of, I don't always believe in, there are some good chiropractors and bad chiropractors, but it's kind of like this psychological adjustment. And then everything else is connected. So it all falls into place. So if I, for example, tonight, um, made a healthy meal that I then ate outside with my family. And we have a practice in our house of sharing favorite moments. And then we played a game. We did 5 minutes of a game. My son right now is really into music. So we've been playing music from across the decades. And then you have to guess what the song is. In that 30 minutes, I have engaged our capacities for eating good, healthy food, for regulating. We feel safe, we feel secure, for play, creativity, love, connection, belonging, celebration, a sense of contribution. Everybody has a job. Can you grab this? Can you do this? I have a role. And so here's just a dinner, but it has naturally lit up all of the conditions we need that's going to have an incredibly profound protective impact on our biology, our psychology, and our ability to be wholly human. I think you'd agree that when we think about healthy psychology, it's not about diminishing challenge. It's about, do I have what I need to experience the fullness of life? To really have the supports that I need for it. And so that gives me incredible hope. Where I struggle is sending my kids into education systems or sending my husband and I into workforce systems that have policies in particular that every day keep my kids or keep my husband and I from those essentials, sleep in particular. And then we just have to figure out, that's when with the limited time we have, that's when we know when it's worth asking and advocating for change.
Wow, you've really kind of packed a packed a punch in what you said. the I'm just kind of pausing here, just kind of taking in what you've said. To make a very, kind of imperfect analogy to what you're saying, um, for people who play sports, whether it's, swimming or, any sport, if you're going to be good at the sport, you need to be prepared to go back to basics. Um, and which is why people do, incredibly boring drills. They're going back to kind of basics. And it's kind of critical to kind of performing well in a sport. And what you're talking about in a way is there are some basics here, and we need to kind of get those, current life has kind of disrupted and obscured those basics. And we really need to, if we're going to kind of thrive, we really need to keep those basics in mind and kind of keep coming back to them. And I think, your book does a superb job of, outlining this and giving us kind of the encouragement to go back to basics.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, you nailed it. I'm a lifetime swimmer. I was trained as a very competitive swimmer when I was very young, and I still swim at the Y all the time. And periodically, someone will stop me and say, I wasn't a collegiate swimmer, but they'll say, oh, where did you compete? And they're always surprised that I wasn't a college swimmer. But it's because as a little kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, I was taught all of the fine movements of how to angle my hand and how to get the best air in how I tilted my head to breathe. And those little mini moves, because they were practiced so many times and so early, they look natural. I don't even realize I'm doing it. And so I think for us, it's a shame that we have gotten as far as we are in our lives without these things always prioritized. But the real warning here is that our kids who have more things weathering them than we did, in particular the technology and the real existential dread. Childhood defined by the pandemic and AI and other really big disruptive things. They're already feeling the burnout that we feel right now and the overwhelm that we feel right now. And so we do have to treat rehumaning as a practice that they can learn all of the fine movements to, so that as they progress in the world, it does feel natural. You throw me into a lake, an ocean, a pool, waves, no waves, I'm going to know how to swim. I'm also going to know when it's too dangerous and I can't swim. I need to stay out of the water. And so that is a beautiful way of thinking about rehumaning as, what we're doing for their childhoods and what we're doing for our lives.
So, Stephanie, we're about out of time. And where can people learn more about you and what you're doing with
Yeah, I would love to be in touch with your listeners. If you're listening right now, you are my people. If this is the kind of podcast that you are listening to, I'm there with you. And so you can just go to rehumaning.com. I'm getting ready to launch a Substack with really um, short reflection pieces on rehumaning. I told somebody as a joke, these are things that if you bring your phone into the bathroom with you, which you shouldn't, but we all, unfortunately, many of us do, that you can like read in the space it takes to use the bathroom. But really, quick research and like, how do we take this on as an active, lifelong process? So people can go again just to rehumaning.com. The book, How We Thrive, is available wherever you get your books. You can also find all the good links on rehumaning.com. And for the first time ever, I had other people record the audiobooks to my last two books, but based on a lot of recommendations, I recorded this one. So if you want to hear me read How We Thrive and throw in emphasis with things that were particularly important, anywhere you get audiobooks, you can find this one. And as you're going about that busy life, you can listen to the audio version of How We Thrive.
Well, Stephanie, it's been such a privilege to be able to kind of talk to you today.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
Thank you for listening to Your Anxious Child. Please leave us a rating and review in iTunes to help us get the word out. If you'd like to learn more and find additional resources, visit us at edwardplimpton.com.